keep their cars looking stock on the outside, so as not to attract lawful attention. 1940 Ford business coupes were popular cars of choice. Along with engine modifications, back panels were removed to make room for contraband. Leaf spring suspensions were fortified by adding steel leaves. Wider wheels and tires helped drivers navigate hairpin turns on bumpy back roads. Some drivers installed large stainless steel containers in the trunk, which were fitted with a valve that could release its contents in the midst of a chase. After their Saturday night runs, the drivers often got together to race on Sundays, competing for a few extra dollars on a burgeoning circuit that would come to be known as NASCAR.
That's how NASCAR started, and that's what NASCAR is today. It was the moonshiners running against each other with their stock-looking cars that really weren't stock underneath.
Car customizers had made their mark on dry lakes and racetracks. But a younger generation would soon put the hot in hot rod by taking it to the streets. NASCAR legend and former moonshine runner Junior Johnson once served 11 months in prison after a raid on his family's still. Custom Cars will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to Custom Cars on Modern Marvels. At a raceway near Bakersfield, California, long rows of meticulously restored roadsters and customs strut their stuff at the annual Hot Rod Reunion. It's a scene that harkens back to an era when hot rods were an emblem of California teen culture, like surfboards and rock and roll, viewed with suspicion by parents and with envy by peers.
Those were simpler times, less complicated, less nuanced. So you had a big snarling V8, pretty much the world was your oyster.
Hot rodding's golden age began shortly after World War II. Production of new cars had been suspended during the war, and once it resumed, older models became cheap and plentiful. A younger generation of hot rodders gradually developed a look that reflected the need for speed. Hoods and fenders were stripped off, even for street driving, while a chopped windshield and bologna-sliced air stacks above the carburetors all but screamed power.
Right here, we have basically the essence of a hot rod. It's a 32 Ford Roadster, original 32 frame, 32 Roadster body, steel body. No amenities, no air conditioning, no power steering, no power brakes, just pure power in a lightweight body, stripped of anything non-necessary to make it go fast.
Hollywood's hot rod image of reckless abandon wasn't entirely contrived. Unlike the dry lakes racers, Southern California's hot rodders did their racing on the street, with often disastrous results.
There was a lot of stigma against hot rodders because of the street racing and the unsafe nature of the cars. They were just put together basically a body on a chassis, the lighter the better, with a big motor, not necessarily good on brakes, not necessarily, a lot of them good on suspension or turning, and they'd go out and race and crash and people would die.
To help corral the problem, Hot Rod magazine editor Wally Parks formed the National Hot Rod Association in 1951 to move races off the streets and into sanctioned areas, the beginning of modern-day drag racing.
There were so many drag strips you could just go out and partake on a Wednesday night or a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, wide open. And got almost everybody off the street as far as street racing was going on.
While hot rods aimed for speed, classic customs celebrated style. These were full-bodied cars, whose outlines were molded and streamlined to create a more aesthetically pleasing look. Early customizers painted their cars in dark, subtle hues. They removed door handles and emblems and stripped away excess chrome. Fenders were extended to create long, graceful lines, while headlights were Frenched by molding them inward. Replacing stock parts with higher-end grills, bumpers, and wheel covers bequeathed an exotic, uncertain identity to otherwise familiar Fords and Mercurys.
They could take a Cadillac grill and put it in this Ford. They could take the Cadillac wheel covers, take the big white wall tires that were on the fancy cars, put the Buick skirts over the back, and all of a sudden, what is this car?
More radical alterations included channeling, in which the floor was removed so the body could be lowered over the frame. Then the floor was reattached. Channeling left less room inside the car, but brought the body closer to the ground.
They had to be low, they had to be raked just right, you know, they had to look like great big bars of soap sliding down the street.
Magazines showcased the work of top California customizers, like Sam and George Barris.
I was able to photograph as we were building cars, and I would put how-to, these are done, in the magazines. So the guy back in Kokomo, Indiana said, oh, I can now chop a top because I seen the way Barris did it. But every Merc we chopped was different. We never made one or two exact.
A 1951 Mercury customized by the Barris brothers for its owner, Bob Hirohata, was driven from Los Angeles to Indianapolis to compete in a major car show. When it took the top prize, a star was born.
He came up with this, what at the time was a totally revolutionary color, which was to go away from these deep dark colors to this bright pastel, seafoam green or ice green, whatever you want to call it.
Restored to its original state by its owner of 40 years, Jim McNeil, the Hirohata Merc may be the most famous custom ever made. For many, its flowing lines and exquisite detail mark the apex of the lean, clean custom style.
The grille in this car is made of 3 1951 Ford grills. This would be the center section. It used to have bullets here. They took the bullets out, moved these pieces in, and then they took another section like this and made one here, and another section from this end and put it over here together, same on this side, and then handmade these plastic parking lights. So it was one of the first cars that actually took up the whole front with a nice wide floating type of grille. There used to be a dip here that they removed and brought this line straight back to this point, and then they actually split the fender here and brought this side out where a piece of metal was welded in here all the way back. These are 52 Chevy teeth right here out of a grill, and then they made the skirts that are flush mounted with the fender. And these are 52 Lincoln taillights. And they made a nice little roll around there and you know, smoothed it all in around there and cut the bumper so this fit. And then they ran the exhaust tips right out through the bumper, which was really a really custom touch. You know, the pipes hung down and you would scrape them anyway. So that was, you know, and that was something that really caught on.
Inside the car, green and white tuck and roll pleats are augmented by handcrafted dash knobs and pinstripes by the celebrated custom artist Von Dutch. But how do you get into this car? Pressing a hidden button along the chrome strip activates a solenoid, a kind of triggering device inside the door panel. The solenoid's plunger pulls the latch. The trunk opens the same way.
And you can see when you push the button, this magnet pulls in and it pulls this trunk latch open, and that's what opens the trunk.
They drive into a drive-in and they get out, close the door, and you know, the Joe family man would look over and go, how are you going to get back in that thing?
The Hirohata Merc's vibrant two-tone paint also signaled a transition to an era of more visually striking candy colors. These were bright toners applied over a base of gold or silver paint, then covered with up to 40 coats of clear lacquer and hand rubbed to a blinding sheen. Gene Winfield developed a technique of blending candies with pearls. Early pearls were finely ground seashells, mixed with lacquer and sprayed over the toner to create a subtle gleam.
I would paint a car white and put the gold pearl over the white, and in the sun, in the highlighted areas, the gold would just jump out at you. But then on the downside, where you'd look down across the shadowed side, it had a very slight blue cast.
As the 50s progressed, customs grew even more ornate. Candies and pearls gave way to panel paint, scallops, and flames. Imaginative custom designs like Ed Big Daddy Roth's cartoonish fiberglass bodies, Darryl Starbird's futuristic bubble tops, and George Barris's Batmobile, featured in the popular 60s TV show, turned their creators into icons. For a glorious decade, customs and hot rods flourished as antidotes to Detroit's relatively stodgy style. But by the late 50s, major manufacturers were aping the streamlined customs look.
Styling verges on the spectacular, from air-scooped grills to the dramatically sweeping tail fins that dominate most of the 57 models. The cars are longer and lower than ever this year, too.
A few years later, Detroit began producing lines of muscle cars and pony cars that combined sporty looks with hot rod horsepower. Mainstream imitations were flattering, but for hot rodders and customizers, their effects were devastating.
Now a customer can walk into the dealership and buy a muscle car for maybe $4,000 or $5,000, and instead of spending the same money on a car that he already paid $3,000 or $4,000 for. So Detroit really just totally ruined the custom business.
Hot rods and customs pretty much disappeared from the streets. And they stayed gone for a couple of decades.
But even as classic customs faded from view, an emerging car culture would ride lower and slower than ever. To create the original TV Batmobile, George Barris customized a 1955 Lincoln concept car called the Futura. Custom cars will return on Modern Marvels. We now return to custom cars on Modern Marvels.
Vamos a parquear allá,
East of Los Angeles on a Sunday afternoon, a cavalcade of shimmering, metal-flaked, pinstriped cruisers practice a unique style of hop and roll. For these custom cars, it's all part of a weekend ritual that's been going on for decades. The dance of the lowriders.
Lowriding, to me, is a flashy car. But it's more than that, I would say. Lowriding's a lifestyle. I mean, just having a vehicle to portray my own individuality.
Lowriding came into its own during the 1960s, even as other forms of customizing were going out of style. Its roots can be traced to the 1940s, when fashion-minded